So we got a chill commentary today, my friends. We are going to be talking about some trade rumors, some updates as to whom it is some of my favorite teams might be interested in trading for. Now, we've got Habs, Red Wings coverage today, but I wanted to open this video off by talking about the most important thing we had seen from either of these teams yesterday. Sorry, Vancouver, but defeating you in 6-3 fashion isn't really that important in the grand scheme of things. However, over in Detroit, Red Wings fans finally got the solace that they deserved, as Sergey Fedorov's number was retired, hung from the rafters, and Fedorov himself straight up said that he made a mistake by leaving the Detroit Red Wings when he did. It was a huge mistake. That's on me, Fedorov said. And talk about vindication. Talk about a guy who is willing to bury the hatchet, put all the ill feelings under the bridge, take all of this water and just chuck it over there. Obviously, they had to do the jersey retirement on a night where the Canes are in town. Symbolic, of course, but I just wanted to give some props over to the Red Wings organization, Sergey Fedorov, everybody involved in the ceremony yesterday. Obviously was a very memorable moment. But with that being said, we've got some Detroit Red Wings conversations to dive into, as well as some Habs stuff. So let's head over onto what Elliotte Friedman said on the latest 32 Thoughts podcast about Calgary Flames defenseman Rasmus Andersson. Friedman said there was a report on social media on the weekend that something was going on with the Detroit Red Wings and Andersson. I don't know. I would have to think that Detroit would have to know what Andersson would sign for before they would do that. And it's funny because this conversation of Rasmus Andersson, a pretty solid defenseman for the Calgary Flames, not the best defenseman in the league, but one of the better ones in the Pacific Division. This idea of him getting traded obviously stems from his contract, which is set to expire at the end of the year. He's making $4.5 million and he's 29 years old. 6'1", 203, right-handed player, who, at his best, is a 40 to 50-point defenseman. It's just, he hasn't really been the healthiest the past few years. He's been tasked with a lot of duty with this Calgary Flames lineup, which does open the door to him potentially getting better production and more sustainable play if he was just on a better team. But I find it interesting how Friedge is going out there and strictly saying that part of the reason the Detroit Red Wings don't make that much sense as a dance partner for a Rasmus Andersson trade right now is because of the extension talk. This was the same thing that we had discussed yesterday, when Friedman said as well that Quinn Hughes, formerly of the Vancouver Canucks, wanted to go over to Detroit, but it wasn't a move that Yzerman was comfortable making without the guarantee of an extension. And I called that move a little bit short-sighted, mostly because of the fact that Quinn Hughes isn't eligible to sign an extension until July. It's funny, because we did make a video about that yesterday, and a bunch of you on the comments were saying stuff like, yeah, well, if the Red Wings wanted Quinn Hughes, they just gotta wait a year and a half. And I was like, oh man, that would be awesome if Quinn decided to take his talents over to Michigan once more. But at the same time, I do think that Red Wings fans kind of pushing this idea that a Quinn Hughes is going to come over, it's almost like the Jersey Devils fans that were saying the same thing about Quinn and their team for years and years and years, only to see how that story ended up with the Devils all of a sudden in shambles. Jack Hughes and Luke Hughes not doing all too well. Except for yesterday, I guess, where New Jersey once again won the Hughesapalooza Bowl. Yeah, that's right, New Jersey defeated Minnesota. Pretty handily, I would say. But it does seem like Stevie Y is not wanting to toss away the assets that he has carelessly. And I say carelessly, not fully believing that a Quinn Hughes or a Rasmus Andersson trade would be careless, just without the guarantee of an extension. I can see where Yzerman is coming from, it's just I do question whether or not maybe his hesitance is a little too conservative for a team that is looking to try and be a contender year in and year out. I can use that word, contender, since the Wings are the top team in the Atlantic Division right now. They are, knock on wood, going to make the playoffs. So I think it's fair to say there can be some growing up in terms of building the roster and allowing the guys on the team to have the best assembled line of guys available to them. But either way, being too careful has never hurt most people, so we'll just wait and see what Yzerman ends up doing once the trade deadline comes. If Rasmus Andersson agrees to an extension with Detroit prior to any sort of a trade, then maybe the deal goes through. Who really knows? That's what Friedman is implying on his show. But speaking about Friedge, let's go out there and talk about another conversation point that he brought up on the program. It goes over Blake Coleman and the Montreal Canadiens. There's been a lot of talk about Montreal. I had some other teams that were telling me not to buy into the Canadiens' possibility, that there are other teams that may have an advantage here. And now that I'm thinking about it, oh yeah, there's a reason, subconscious reason why I wanted to link these two trade rumors together. It's because they're both Calgary players. Oh my goodness, yes, I'm an idiot. That is a perfect storm. Rasmus Andersson getting tossed out there to Detroit, and Blake Coleman discussed in Canadiens talk. Blake Coleman, of course, is a name that we have discussed on the channel already as a Montreal Canadiens target. He is a strong two-way winger who is a little bit older and whose contract goes on till the end of 2027 at $4.9 million a year. Coleman's a fine player. He has had more productive seasons in the past, but the two-time Stanley Cup champion certainly brings some pedigree, experience, and a lot of stability, I would say, on the wings for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, you can also debate whether or not a Blake Coleman really is necessary with the amount of guys the Montreal Canadiens already have on their payroll. They have a number of players who are injured, a number of guys that are not really useful at the moment. That's not their fault, of course, but still, I think it does go to show that the Montreal Canadiens have been eagerly adding and building and putting these new players in better spots, and it's paid off in spades. You're seeing some pretty strong results here. But for Blake Coleman, he is a guy that certainly would add more of that experience, depth, presence to the Canadiens' middle to bottom six. I do kind of wonder, if you have an assembly of guys that involve Philippe Deneau, Josh Anderson, Brendan Gallagher, Blake Coleman, you are putting so much experience and pedigree in the middle of that lineup while you just let the top six guys cook and score all the points. Suzuki, Caulfield, Texier, Slavkovsky, Demidov, and Kapanen. It's almost like a varied version of the 2021 team, except you are putting more emphasis on the top-tier young dudes producing you offense. I like it a lot, actually. It's a nice idea. And I think the Canadiens at this point, they are in a spot where, after having a successful run last year, making the playoffs and making an impact with Demidov, now we are seeing that guys like Juraj Slavkovsky are taking that next step. Demidov is getting a lot more comfortable. Oliver Kapanen, same thing. Lane Hudson doesn't need to be a power play one option anymore. You've got Noah Dobson. Things are looking really good for the Montreal Canadiens at the moment, and adding some more experience and leadership in Blake Coleman would just be the icing on top. And yes, the contract, it's not the best contract, and there is another year after, but I do think that he's a good enough player to not totally fall off next season, and then if the Canadiens want to re-sign him for cheap in 2027, if that were to be the case, then maybe that works too. So, Blake Coleman, he's been linked to the Habs. Friedman says don't discredit other teams though, which I also do think we have to acknowledge at the very least. It might not just be Montreal interested in Blake Coleman. So with that in mind, I want you to let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel, firstly, about the Sergey Fedorov jersey number retirement, the Rasmus Andersson to Detroit trade rumors? How do you feel about Blake Coleman and the Montreal Canadiens material? Let me know in the comments all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.